The morning was cool and clear, a typical November morning where the sun's rays, although bright, struggled to warm the air which remained biting. The sky was a piercing blue, cloudless, but a light mist lingered, suspended between the ground and the sky. The wind, discreet but constant, blew a coolness that forced passers-by to tighten their jackets and hasten their pace. The dead leaves were scattered on the pavement, carried away by the winter breath, in a melancholy dance, making the atmosphere both peaceful and icy. Alexander Dupont, a 28-year-old millionaire, walked quickly through the streets of this upscale neighborhood, his heels clicking on the hard ground. His footsteps echoed in the deserted street, a symphony of haste. He wore an impeccable suit, the kind you only wear for the most important meetings. Her black hair was neatly styled, and a gold watch, her only ostentatious luxury, gleamed discreetly in the morning light. At first glance, he seemed the epitome of success, a young, ambitious man poised to dominate the business world. But today, he was not calm. He was late for a decisive meeting, an appointment that would determine the future of his company. The tension in his mind was palpable. This contract with new foreign investors, which, if successful, would propel his company to new heights, was crucial. The kind of opportunity he couldn't afford to miss. Everything, absolutely everything, rested on this meeting. His thoughts raced as he checked his phone again. Messages from his partners, calendar updates, persistent reminders. He had no time to waste. Every minute counted. His pace quickened. His face, usually calm and confident, betrayed a nervousness he wasn't used to feeling. That day seemed to be the one that would either consolidate his empire or cause it to falter. He turned the corner of a busy street, his head completely occupied with a succession of tasks that awaited him. But then, a detail caught his attention. He saw a woman sitting on the sidewalk, a baby swaddled in her arms. At that moment, everything seemed to slow down. The scene before him was incongruous, almost unreal in this prosperous neighborhood, where poverty seemed to be a distant specter, which we carefully avoided approaching. She was there, fragile, almost invisible, in the eyes of the majority of passers-by, but she was standing there, in the street that Alexander took every day to go to his office. His clothes were worn, torn by time and wear. A thick layer of dust covered her thin arms, which supported with almost desperate tenderness a baby, swaddled in dirty blankets. His face, emaciated and marked by nights without a roof over his head, seemed almost unreal under the dull gaze of the passers-by who, like him, all ignored him without a glance. His pale, almost translucent skin bore witness to days without sun and nights spent in the cold of the asphalt. Her eyes were heavy, tired, as if hope had been exhausted with every breath she took. His eyes, black as onyx, seemed to carry the weight of infinite suffering, like a raging sea, filled with torments that escaped all rational comprehension. Life seemed to have overwhelmed her irreversibly. The baby, barely a year old, was snuggled close to her, his little head resting against his mother's chest, seemingly asleep, but his alarmingly pale skin and shallow breathing spoke of a penetrating cold engulfing his fragile body. The baby's little hand, barely visible under the blanket, twitched from time to time, like an instinctive movement. Alexander suddenly felt overcome by a strange sensation, an unbearable discomfort. This contrast, brutal and striking, abruptly pulled him from his thoughts. He had passed through this neighborhood 1,000 times, indifferent to the human suffering expressed there. But today was different. This little human being, this baby, this vulnerable being that he saw for the first time, seemed to call for a form of responsibility, a duty of humanity to which he did not know how to respond. He hurried past, instinctively lowering his eyes, as if he could ignore this pain simply by averting his gaze. His phone vibrated in his hand, reminding him of the impending meeting, and his thoughts immediately went back to the numbers, to the investors, to the financial projections. But an inexplicable shiver ran down his spine, a shiver that did not come from the November cold, but from within, a discomfort that slowly seeped into his heart. For what? Why did this scene disturb him so much? Alexander turned his head. Just a moment. But this moment was enough. He saw the woman slowly looking up at him, as if sensing someone was watching her. Her lips trembled, not from the cold, but from a despair that she no longer knew how to mask.
She whispered, in a broken breath, almost inaudible, "Help me, please."
His words hit Alexander hard. He wasn't used to this kind of encounter. Not with people like her. Not in his world. These words, simple but heavy with meaning, resonated in a strange way, like a direct appeal to his conscience, something he had long ignored, hidden under the demands of his status and success. Her deep black eyes captured Alexander's gaze, as if she could read him, understand his inner struggle. These eyes seemed to hold all the suffering in the world, but also a burst of humanity that he had not seen for a long time, a form of humanity that he believed to be forgotten in his sterile daily life. Alexander hesitated, his heart beating harder with each passing second. This scene, so raw, so direct, registered in his mind like a violent intrusion. He had never been confronted with such a reality, and the urgency of his meeting, the importance of his professional commitments, were calling for him to leave. His eyes flickered to the clock on his phone one last time, an unbearable pressure filling him, reminding him that every minute that passed brought him closer to an opportunity he couldn't afford to miss. But there, facing this woman, with her baby in her arms, a deep unease arose within him. The baby, strangely, seemed to be sleeping soundly, his breathing steady and calm, unaffected by the suffering around them. However, the image of this little being, his skin too pale and his body curled up in the arms of a mother whose struggle was obvious, deeply disturbed Alexander. This brutal contrast between the innocence of the child and the harshness of the situation struck him. Without thinking further, like an automatism, he plunged his hand into his leather wallet. His fingers closed on a €200 bill. This gesture, instinctive and rapid, seemed to free him from a weight that he was not even aware of having carried. Money, he knew, could provide temporary respite, even if just for a few hours. He handed the note to the woman, the hope of a quick and simple solution looming in his mind. "Take this, go to the hospital or a help center," he said, almost dryly, his gaze averted, eager to get back on his way. He thought he had made a generous gesture, a quick act to ease his conscience and resume his frantic race. But the woman didn't move. She did not immediately grab the note, but looked at it for a long time. Her eyes, still deep, stared at him as if she were scrutinizing him, trying to understand his intentions. Finally, she looked down at the note. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she couldn't seem to grasp it. A silence stretched between them, heavy and unexpected. Then, in a soft voice, but full of defiance, she uttered words which, for Alexander, resonated like a clap of thunder. "Do you think the money will be enough? Do you really believe that money can solve everything?" The words hit Alexander head-on, destabilizing him in his approach. He had expected gratitude, a forced smile, or even a simple thank you, which would have allowed him to free himself from this encounter. But reality, this distorting mirror of his own beliefs, struck him cruelly. He had reduced himself to offering a note, a sum of money, thinking that this would be enough to erase the pain, the suffering, the broken dignity of this woman. He realized, with painful brutality, that he had just reduced a human being to a simple number, a banknote. As if money could buy everything, repair everything. Alexander lowered his head, shame invading his mind and his actions. He felt tiny in the face of this reality that he had long ignored. The selfishness of his comfortable life, of his professional successes which were never interested in those who fought every day to survive, hit him hard. He realized with devastating clarity that his world was an isolated bubble, protected by the walls of his wealth and ambitions. He had never had to face suffering like this, and he wasn't ready. His ideas, so practical, so easy to apply in the field of business, collapsed in the face of a much more complex, much more human reality. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice hesitant, almost inaudible, as if he was trying to find the right words, but no words could ease the situation. "I didn't think." She shook her head gently, a slight movement but full of meaning. "You don't understand," she said, her eyes still locked on his. "It's not money that we need, it's dignity, it's human warmth." The words hit even harder than before. Dignity, this intangible thing, These values that he thought acquired and secured by success seemed to dissolve before him. Alexander felt caught in a whirlwind of guilt, a guilt he had never known in his sanitized world of goals and numbers. Money, he now understood, solved nothing. It offered momentary relief, but it didn't get to the heart of the problem. It wasn't money she needed. It was a humanity that he seemed to have forgotten, a look that did not judge, an outstretched hand, a word of support, something that could not be bought or given in haste. Alexander turned back to the baby in his arms. He was waking up, his misty eyes slowly opening, and then he began to cry, a piercing cry that tore through the silence. Alexander was not used to seeing a baby in such conditions. He who had always had everything he needed, clean diapers, a heated house, a present and loving mother, he felt like a stranger in a world he thought he knew. The sound of the baby crying, that desperate, innocent cry, made him reel. It wasn't a cry for money. It was not a cry for a quick fix or blind charity. It was a cry of human suffering, of cold, of abandonment, of solitude. It was a cry that spoke of everything he had forgotten. He felt a pang in his heart. He realized that he was trapped in his own disconnected existence, locked in the priorities he had imposed on himself, without ever looking at what was happening around him, in this parallel world where hope and dignity were unattainable luxuries. "I have an idea," he said finally, his voice trembling, as if the thought had just arisen with new urgency. He abruptly turned away from the woman, his decision suddenly made, like a burst of lucidity striking his mind. He picked up his phone with almost mechanical speed, the sound of his fingers on the screen echoing in the silence around them. He dialed a number, waited a few seconds before speaking in a rushed, authoritative voice. "I want a vehicle sent to me right away, and that we prepare a temporary adoption file in a reception center for this woman and her child." His voice was firm, almost icy, and each word seemed to carry weight. He hung up quickly, without waiting for his assistant's response, his gaze still fixed on the mother and child. An almost obsessive look, as if he was trying to grasp something he still had difficulty understanding, something he had not seen until that point in his life. The woman, who had remained motionless all this time, looked at him in astonishment. Her dull blue eyes stared at him as if trying to decipher his intentions. When he approached her, his gestures were sure, but the gentleness in his eyes betrayed a part of doubt that he could not name. He stopped at a respectable distance, not wanting to rush her. "I'll help you and your baby. You deserve more than to live on the streets," he said, his voice calmer this time, but nonetheless full of resolve. He knew that what he had just proposed didn't meet all their needs, but he hoped that he could somehow offer them some relief. The woman was silent for a moment, her gaze drifting to the baby who was cuddling against her, like a little being lost in a world that offered him little protection. Then, slowly, as if each movement took all of her, she stood up, the baby still against her breast. The silence between them was heavy, charged with an invisible tension. She looked at him then, a question in her eyes, her features marked by years of invisible struggles. "For what? Why me?" Her voice shook slightly, but there was a note of defiance in her question, as if she was looking for a reason for what seemed so incongruous in her reality. A stylish businessman, pressed for time, would suddenly save them? Alexander hesitated, his lips opening and closing as he searched for the right words. His thoughts mingled, the fragments of his old life colliding with this situation which, in a few minutes, had turned everything he thought he knew upside down. "Because I see you. And I finally understood that money can't fix everything. But maybe I can change the trajectory of a life." His voice was lower now, almost painful. He wasn't sure what he had just said, but he knew he had found some truth, something that eluded his past existence. He didn't just want to buy his conscience with a ticket, he wanted to offer something more, something real. She looked at him, and for a moment he thought she was going to push him away, that she was going to reject everything. But her eyes were strangely calm, as if she had finally understood something in his words. An imperceptible smile appeared on his lips, a smile marked by pain and recognition, but also by a strange form of skepticism. "You are different from those who pass by," she said finally, her voice soft but full of strength.
Mavi, you still have a chance.
These words, simple but heavy, resonated in the air, and Alexander suddenly felt exposed, as if she had just opened a door for him that he had not seen. He didn't know what this chance entailed, but he had the strange and unsettling feeling that something had changed between them. A few minutes later, the vehicle arrived. Alexander felt his heart rise slightly, as if this simple gesture was already going to change something in the destiny of both of them. They took their places in the car, the woman and her child settling into the back seat with almost sacred slowness. The door closed behind them, and the vehicle started moving. As the distance between them and the street corner grew, Alexander felt a weight lift from his shoulders, but at the same time, a feeling of guilt persisted. He knew it was just a one-off thing, that what he had just done wasn't going to change this woman's life overnight. He knew that his gesture, as noble as it was, would not erase the deep wounds of this society which excludes and marginalizes, which too often forgets human dignity. But it was a start.
A small start.
And maybe that beginning was all he could offer at that moment. In the car, his gaze fell on the woman, who was still holding her baby in her arms, a lost, almost inaccessible look. She seemed to be looking out the window, but Alexander felt that she saw further, beyond the glass, perhaps to a place he could never reach. He then thought of the words she had said to him. Maybe, after all, he hadn't just changed his life. Maybe she had just changed hers. She had just reminded him that behind every face there is a story often ignored, a forgotten dignity. A world where humanity was often reduced to statistics, to social cases, but where each person carried within them a truth too often stifled by social conventions and prejudices. And in this small gesture, in this decision taken on a whim, he had perhaps, finally, begun to see what he had always ignored.